One of the most common areas I look at when it comes to runners is alignment of the lower limb, okay? So we think of ankle, knee, and hip. Do we have this good vertical alignment where we're staying in a good position here? Or do we notice any kind of collapse or deviation from that vertical alignment? So when it comes to that, the hips are super important from a strength and stability standpoint to make sure as you contact the ground, one foot lands on the ground and all our force comes down on that. We absorb as we strike the ground. Does that knee collapse in, or is that hip and ankle in a good position where it stabilizes and controls the position? So as we hit the ground, do we collapse, or do we hit the ground or we stay strong because we're getting stability at this proximal and distal ends, okay? So when it comes to that, I've done tons of videos on hip stability, maintaining alignment, different band exercises to promote that. But what you really need to make sure of is that the core, specifically lateral core, obliques, QL, these muscles that kind of wrap around and stabilize through the pelvis, the core and the hip work together. Because we can work on retraining, getting the hip to stabilize, but unless that core is really creating that solid foundation to stabilize the pelvis, a lot of times we really lose control lower down, okay? So I want to show you today a couple of very simple exercises. Simple and they are kind of simple. They can be pretty challenging, but if you start the right way and progress, you'll notice a nice kind of seamless progression from one to the next. Okay, so our first one, it's the modified lateral elbow stabilization. Sounds pretty fancy, not too crazy or nothing special, I would say, but all we're doing on this one to get to our next exercise is just shortening the lever arm. So we're gonna, instead of starting up here, we're gonna pull the legs back, so knees, hips, and shoulders in a straight line. I'm gonna push off away from the ground, so I'm thinking of more of a modified side plank here. I'm gonna lift the hips up, make sure I have this straight line, and then I'm gonna straighten my top leg, lift, and lower. So a second ago, we talked about core and hip working together. In this position, we have this entire lateral line working strong to keep us upright, okay? We have these obliques, QL, these muscles around the side to prevent our hips from dropping. And we also, because we're on one leg in that position, we have these glutes, these rotators, these muscles on the outside of the hip that are super important for running. They're fighting to push the leg down into the ground to keep us upright. So these areas here have to work together to really maintain the position, okay? As you get that first one, you can do 6, 8, 10, 12, 15 repetitions, 2 to 3 sets on each side. You can really own that position and you're not faltering or losing control. From there, if we go to the full lateral elbow stabilization, so now we're not going from the knee, we're going from the foot to really increasing that lever arm. I'm gonna push away from the ground from the start, hips up. Make sure the corner of the shoe is digging in the ground so I have good space between the floor and the lower leg. And then I'm going to raise and lower that top leg. So as I lift up off, my bottom hip, this lower side closer to the ground core is really fighting to make sure as I lift, you'll see that's common for a lot of people. They'll start to drop because they don't have the strength and the stability to really own the position because there's some kind of weakness somewhere throughout that lateral line. Okay, so in this next one, I'm going to show you more of an upright and dynamic exercise that really ties these two areas together in more of a movement that's similar to running. Okay, so the last exercise in this progression really teaches us how to be in more of an upright and dynamic position that carries over to running, because often what I see is people are very good at doing these exercises on the ground or on a piece of exercise equipment, but does that always translate over to your running? Sometimes I don't think it does unless you have some kind of exercise that really solidifies those muscles, that balance in a position that's similar to running. Okay, so what we're going to do here is holding a single dumbbell in the hand. If we already just think about what's happening here, dumbbell automatically, because I'm in the suitcase position, if you think of when we used to carry suitcases back in the day, the suitcase would pull you down to the side. But if we really focus on maintaining an upright position, you see what I did there. I shortened the space between the top of the pelvis and the rib cage. So these muscles that we were looking at in the lateral elbow stabilization, the modified version of that, are firing on the outside of the core here to make sure I'm maintaining that position. So strength and stability there throughout the spine to stay nice and upright and level throughout the shoulders. Now, because we want to involve the hip, again, hip and core working together to provide stability and control, is going into a single leg marching motion. So single arm dumbbell marching, maintaining alignment, nice tall shoulders level. Doing that for 8 to 10 steps down, and then switching arms because I want to get the other side, and doing the same thing, but balance and stability. We're tying everything together here. We're getting the core to make sure it's not pulling down. I have good control through that core on the opposite side of the dumbbell. We're also getting the hip and ankle stability to really own the position, work on single leg stance and alignment, and that vertical position that I was talking about before throughout the leg. That's what we get through there. So those are 3 different exercises that really show you how to tie together the lateral core and hip, because those are 2 areas that are crucial for running, to making sure those are working together to really provide a good position for the spine, the pelvis, and the hip to work off each other to be successful as a runner.